A comparison of men to fish and grain in biblical literature and Middle Eastern tradition, and the association of men, fish, and grain in pre-Columbian thought, I found this really to be an interesting study. Even more so, I noticed that fish, grain, and men are linked to the concept of resurrection. And this is worlds apart across the sea. If we were to take into consideration where the central narrative of the Book of Mormon took place, and if that's why we're here, Mesoamerica, this imagery and symbolism is important to understanding theological ideologies considered here today. Ancient cultures incorporated various parts of complex art, expressing solid ideas. In other words, the Mesoamerican culture used rich metaphorical and overlapping concepts that are sometimes difficult for people today to comprehend. Artistic expression held sway in lieu of the ability to read and write for those who are not in the upper echelon of governments, in royalty, or those who held prestigious positions. Art today, as well as anciently, is a great tool for making clear ideas, political statements, and religious ideology. Beginning with the least familiar to laymen, is a seemingly mysterious association of fish to maize and maize to men among pre-Columbian cultures. Only through study of their mythological and iconography can scholars unravel these connections. Examining this concept further, I will demonstrate the symbolic bond between fish and maize, and of course we use the word corn today, to men and their association with resurrection, the ultimate hope for goal of mankind. Many gods in the Maya pantheon have what is called a Y, that's W-A-Y. It's a particular object or an animal companion, spirit, or coessence which they are associated. On altar O at Copan, Honduras, a deity stands beside his son, who scholars regard as the young Maya maize god. Directly over his head is a fish, symbolically his animal spirit, his Y. This fish was believed to be the sole coessence of maize. In the Maya culture, fish scales were thought to be comparable to the arrangement of kernels on an ear of corn. This visualization may be the primary link why these two have an affinity one to another. This example is from Chichen Itza. There are two more examples here I'm going to show. This one is from Palenque, Chiapas, Mexico, a lintel on the Temple of the Sun. It has a vertical motif of corn with a fishtail at the bottom. And this one is, let's see, there we go, from Copan, Honduras, Stela D. It portrays the moon goddess between two standing fish touching their mouths on corn motifs. Normally, fish would be seen horizontally, not in an upright position, unless nibbling on a lotus in the water, as we saw before. The Popol Vuh, written by the Quiche Maya after the Spanish conquest, but was taken for previous Maya book coupled with sacred and oral traditions. These stories were related from one generation to the other. There are several translations, and this one is from Alan Christensen. He's at BYU. Today, the Popol Vuh is often considered the Bible of the Maya. Some parts have an affinity to the beginning account in Genesis, starting with the creation of the world. Mesoamerican artists painted mythological scenes in murals and on pottery, as well as sacred stone, as carved stone, in order for their people to understand and remember these stories. Many of these depictions are recognized by scholars as stories from the Popol Vuh. For example, at Itzapa, you have many stela that are from stories of the Popol Vuh. The narrative of the Popol Vuh is of interest in this presentation, and the reason it is because of the tale of the two brothers, Hunahpu and Xbalanque, who archaeologists have dubbed the hero twins. It's much easier to say the hero twins than Hunahpu and Xbalanque. They are the sons of the Maya maize god, attempting to deceive the lords of death in Xibalba, that's the Maya underworld. The hero twins leaped into a fiery furnace. Two supernatural priests called Shulu and Pakam took the twins' charred bodies, ground them up into ashes similar to ground maize, and threw their remains in the waters of the underworld. The lords of death believed they were deceased, but the hero twins miraculously turned into fish and were subsequently reborn as men, proving their power over death. A Maya vase depicts the hero twins emerging from a supernatural type serpent, one already having turned into a fish, the other twin still portrayed as dead, with a typical Maya smoking celt on his forehead. Now, can you see that? Because if there's something you can't see, I'll come over and show it with a pointer. This particular object, the smoking celt, is what the Maya did to represent a moment of transition from life to death. And many stela will have that in a deceased ruler's. You'll have that smoking celt plugged right into the top of his forehead. I want you to note that this twin is resting in what is known as a birth position.
I'm just going to drop this a bit.
Okay. Now can you all hear me? Okay. He will turn into a fish like his twin brother and then survive as he is reborn. The hero twins are also responsible for enabling their father, the maize god, to be resurrected. Many vases depict the Maya maize god in his anthropomorphic state, where he is reborn from a crack in the earth, and in this case, it's called the Mountain of Sustenance. Dennis Tedlock's translation of the Popol Vuh interprets the type of fish the hero twins became, catfish. He writes that they were called Winik-kar, literally person fish. Another Maya vase shows this, and they may very well depict one of the hero twins in their fish form, having a human head with a catfish barbel on his cheek. Stela 5 at Itzapa, Chiapas, Mexico, is a narrative style containing the tree of life, people, deities, birds, fish, etc. I'm sure you're all very familiar with Stela 5. Looking at the left side, there are two fish ascending. And this I'll probably have to point out. And then you have the incense smoke, and then the fish rising up, and they have a fruit in their mouth. Okay, here's the incense burner, smoke, and there's the fish. And they're big on the other side so you can see the fish. I'll be talking about the fish, I'll also go up there. Okay? Do I need to do it over here? Okay. Incense, burner, smoke, fish. And fish up there. Fish here. Okay, so this could be the fruit of the tree of life in their mouth, or it could be another thing, what they call a breath bead. Now, we really don't know which one it is, or it could be both, because the Maya they have conflation of things. So I wanted to explain this Maya art form. The departure of the breath/soul may sometimes be seen in Mesoamerican art as a bead floating in front of a deceased person's nose. It is thought that these beads, which could be corn, a corn seed, or jade, representing green leaves of the maize plant, held the last breath expelled from a person's before death. So Manuel Aguilar said of the breath bead that it is the seed of resurrection. And even if it's the fruit of the tree of life, it's the seed of resurrection, either way. Right? And then also you can see, well, first of all, I'll say, rising to the celestial band at the top of the seal of five, you saw I pointed out the fish. And they're hanging from the heavenly realm, the Zappa sky band. Now, whether or not the fish represent the two individuals portrayed at the bottom left in their deceased states, which I have also considered, or if they represent the two hero twins turning into fish after jumping into the bonfire, I'm of the opinion that they will be resurrected, since they either partook of the fruit of the tree of life or have a breath being. As a researcher, I make assumptions with the information that I have, but in the future I am flexible. I may change my observation. Now the other picture with the two men, you see a breath bead in front of them. This is at Copan. These are rulers on an altar that has all the rulers of Copan all around the four sides, and they are deceased. That's why they have the breath bead. Also of interest is the concept of the spirits of men in Mesoamerica before they were born into this world. Carl Taube writes that the fish painted in the Teotihuacan mythological murals in the Valley of Mexico may represent ancestors in the form of fish as they traveled before their birth into mortality. This, of course, has a familiar ring with the Latter-day Saint doctrine of the premortal state, and there is much evidence to support the concept among Mesoamerican cultures. And I have listed a lot of them in the notes of this paper, and all of our papers will be on the BMA website after this conference. Also in my book, Weaving Golden Threads, I talk about the premortal state and the many evidences both in early Christianity, other documents that were not canonized in the Bible. And so I have many references to that. Dieter Duding, a German Mayanist, wrote, quote, fishes/human embryos. They are several depictions of gods fishing in a heavenly ocean, or we might say the primordial ocean, that takes place in Tomoenchan, the flowery place. So speaking of Tomoenchan, Bernardo de Sahagún, the Franciscan friar in the 16th century documenting indigenous history and beliefs of Mexico, he recorded an Aztec poem of this celestial paradise. Quote, in the place of rain and mist, where the children of men are made, where the jeweled fish are sought. Tomoenchan is the heavenly place where the children will descend to earth. Therefore, whether being before birth into this world or reborn, resurrected into the afterlife, symbolism of the fish may be the same in some instances in Mesoamerican thought and art. With the understanding that Mesoamerican cultures widely traded their goods with what is now considered the American Southwest, we may look beyond the sphere of Mesoamerica to the North American periphery of Book of Mormon geography, as Mark Wright has put it. Fish iconography can be seen in a classic Mimbres bowl from the Pueblo Indians, dealing with the concept of resurrection. The father of the mythological Mimbres twins is portrayed in an upright birthing position, different from the one seen before with the Maya hero twin. This type posture of birth is known as a hocker, which comes from the German word signifying a squatting position. I had to ask my husband, because he's from Germany, how to pronounce that. But it's spelled, you would see it, H-O-C-K-E-R. The Pueblo individual is deceased, as is indicated by the fish atop his head. The fish in Mimbres art can symbolize souls of the dead. Above and below him are stars, where this father of the twins will be apotheosized or reborn. Mimbres pottery with similar designs depicting the Pueblo twins has been compared to the Popol Vuh story of the Maya hero twins by scholars. Peter first explained that figures swallowed or expelled by fish-type monsters represent death and rebirth traditions in both the Old and New worlds. The left illustration is drawn from a brownware effigy from Colima, Mexico. To the right is a picture of Jonah and the fish. Of course, we all know the story of Jonah, who was swallowed by a fish for 3 days. Jonah's experience inside the fish, translated as a whale in Matthew, was likened by Christ to his future body lying in the tomb and subsequent resurrection. Christ said, "For as Jonas was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man, be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." And of course, what happened after 3 days in the tomb? Christ was resurrected. Looking at the Old Testament, we find in biblical Hebrew the word for fish is dag. The word for corn or grain is dagan. Deriving from these two words is the vegetation and fertility god called Dagon, whose veneration extended from Mesopotamia to the Canaanite area. This pagan god is mentioned several times in the Old Testament. Another revealing correspondence from the Middle East can also be seen between Osiris of Egypt, and he's a dying and a resurrecting grain god, and the grain god of the Maya maize god. Sometimes the mummy of Osiris is depicted sprouting grain, similar to the Mesoamerican king, who often took on the guise of the Maya maize god. Egyptian kings were associated with Osiris. When deceased, both Osiris and the Maya maize god may be associated with the fish, the latter scenario mentioned previously. Osiris had many symbolic forms, animal forms. One of his names was Abydos, fish. As a deceased god, his fish form was in the heavenly river, the Milky Way, in the constellation of Orion. The tomb at Deir el-Medina, Thebes, depicts a fish in the form of an embalmed fish, and that's Anubis standing by him. Buffy Johnson postulates that the deceased portrayed as a fish should be considered as winding its way through the embryonic waters of the underworld before its rebirth at dawn. It may be significant that the Egyptian hieroglyph for a man's body or corpse contains a sign of a fish. Shah. I don't know how to pronounce Egyptian names, but if it was Mayan, X is pronounced sh, so it's XA, and I'm saying Shah. And the word for corpse just has a T at the end, Shait. Considering the mural in Thebes with a beer that has a fish, the word for body or corpse containing a fish, and the belief that the deceased swims symbolically in the waters as fish before their resurrection fits in quite nicely with this concept, which is held exactly like the Maya. It is essential to understand that Mesoamerican cultures believe man is made of maize, not clay, as Christianity believes today, even though clay is symbolic of the elements of the earth. A wonderful modern sculpture by Teodoro Cano portrays this Mesoamerican idea. Cano, no doubt, learned of this concept from Mesoamerica scholars of this ancient tradition among his ancestors. According to the Popol Vuh, after an unsuccessful attempts to create man from wood, and then they tried to make them with several elements, then they tried maize, and this was from the Paschal, the excellent mountain where it contains maize, and this is in the Popol Vuh. They gathered the maize, and it would be made to use to form the flesh of humanity. The creation was a success, and as I quote from Raphael Girard, they then spoke, reasoned, saw and felt, walked and grasped things. They were perfect men in face and good and beautiful form. In accordance with this ideology, the Aztec, using their Nahuatl language, called the flesh of man Tanacayo, while Tanacayotl, with a close contrast, meant maize. These cultures perceive themselves as maize people and literal descendants of the creator couple. In fact, Sahagun wrote that cultures west of the Maya who spoke Nahuatl would express a human being with no hope of living as a withered ear of maize. Scholars say that it was the Maya maize god who brought maize out of the split mountain of sustenance. On this Maya vase, the maize god resurrects from the earth, such as, and this one is a turtle Caracapas, holding a bag of precious corn seed. Duding postulated the maize inside this primordial mountain contained not only grains of maize, but metaphorically the fishes, or, quote, human embryos, as discussed earlier. Others say it was Quetzalcoatl who brought maize to the world. This complex motif is from Veracruz on an El Tajín style pama and depicts Quetzalcoatl bringing maize from the sacred primordial mountain to earth. Now this one I'm going to have to show you. Maize at the top, the Quetzal bird, there's his tail. Here's the serpent for, you all know Quetzal is the bird, Coatl is the serpent, okay. Here's his face of Quetzalcoatl, and here's his shell. The shell represents rebirth and then down here you have what they call wind signs. Those are Mayan for ik. So you have the whole thing there. So you have all the maize coming out of him. And the wind, Quetzalcoatl is also the wind god. He's the breath of life. Okay, now this side. The maize coming right out of his mouth. Here's the Quetzal birds. Here's his tail. The serpents are on the side. And these represent wind. Okay.
What are those things? How do they represent wind?
It's just a T form. It's a Mayan glyph.
Speak into your microphone.
Okay. The T form is a Maya glyph. Don't ask me why they use that for wind, but that's what it is. Cal, do you know?
Well, they have windows that were shaped like.
Yeah, they have windows that are shaped like the T. Yeah, but everyone, they understand that that represents wind, air. Okay. Now let's look at taking a look at the Middle East. Various myths refer to the creation of man, yet Egyptologists still mention little regarding the substance by which men were made by their people. The god Khnum fashioned the bodies of men on a potter's wheel. Therefore, it is assumed by many that in the Egyptian religion, humans were believed to be made of clay. However, there is an inscription on a sarcophagus of Ankh-Nesnaref-Riba that speaks of grain, which was used to create man. Raphael Patai demonstrated there is a similarity between the newborn child and grain in the ancient Near East. He explained that the Jews of Kurdistan considered infants similar to grain and are often placed in a sieve or a winnow or other agricultural implement, such as a kneading trough. There even have been, therefore, Even though mankind was considered to be made of clay or the dust of the earth, they were still considered very closely associated with grain. In the Mesoamerican world, all inanimate objects were considered to have a spirit. There's an element in that each contained an element with a life force that had the ability to continually renew itself. In the Maya Zutahil region, kernels of maize, seed corn, were referred to as muluk. Muk means interred ones, and holuma means little skulls. And that's what these little seed skulls, that's what they call them, little seed skulls. A seed was a skull. These seed skulls, when placed into the ground, watered and sprouted, constituted a rebirth. Raphael Girard stated, agriculture and eschatology are intimately associated. The position of the maize in the bosom of the Mother Earth is identified with that of a child in the maternal womb. This thinking can be simply stated, through death comes life. In fact, the Maya considered this phenomena a metaphor for the resurrection of the human soul. Artistic expression, hieroglyphic texts, and the Quiche Maya's Popol Vuh preserve, quote, the religious mythological basis for apotheosis and resurrection and death, unquote, according to Dori Rentz Boudet, who's a Mayan scholar. The great king Quinichhanab Pacal of Palenque, Chiapas, Mexico, has a most remarkable sarcophagus wherein he's portrayed on his lid as this young maize god. And when he died, he was 86 years old, but he's portrayed as the young maize god lying in a birthing position. Now I want you to remember this birthing position that I showed you before too. While being resurrected from the jaws of the underworld and death, the tree of life is seen in the background, adding to the resurrection scenario. With the lid removed, the inner portion of the sarcophagus is shaped like a fish. Just to clarify his birthing position, we saw it when the hero twins, and you see him in the same position, which will be followed by resurrection and his brother just before turning into a fish lying in this birthing position. Whether a woman giving birth, as we see in a confraternity chest from the Maya Highlands, or Pacal in his resurrection scene on his sarcophagus, the birthing position is the same. The king's body is intentionally similar to the birth of the Maya maize god. His legs are bent, head thrown back, and arms held casually before his chest. He is in the same position of the Maya logograph for Unan, which translates as baby. In this case on the sarcophagus, the king is being resurrected as his prototype, the young maize god. Now let's look again at Pacal. The vessel or bowl he reclines on symbolizes the eastern sun. So I'm going to have to show you that too, I think. This is called the sun bowl. The sun is shaped like a flower in Mayan art. And I'm also going to be talking about the skull right there. These are the jaws of the underworld. Okay. This is a sun bowl shaped like a flower. The sun represents the flowers represent the sun, and here's a skull. Jaws of the underworld. Okay. Okay. Underneath the sun bowl is that it's not just a skull, it's a seed skull. And yes, it has a face. That's because the Maya make inanimate objects animate, even if they are dead. David Stewart remarked that it all makes sense now that new readings of several motifs have been made. All these things point, Stewart said, to the idea of rebirth and resurrection. And that was a quote. That is because the sun figuratively dies each night and it rises in the morning. Seeds sprout and live again, and so too will man. Other times, resurrection among the Maya is depicted as being born from the earth, often represented as a turtle carapace. It is here with the Maya maize gods. It is here with the Maya maize god's resurrection. The skull buried in the turtle's back again represents the corn seed, which sprouts along with the maize god. The maize god is resurrected along his two sons, the hero twins of the Popol Vuh. It is an artistic metaphor that life springs from the bones, as maize springs from the bone corn seed. Today, the Chorti and Zulu Hill Maya view Christ and the maize god as sacred. Having an affinity one to the other, Father Rother, a Catholic priest and missionary in the mid-1900s, specifically desired an ancient Maya symbol to represent God as an aspect, as the bread of life, on the pulpit of the Catholic Church in Santiago, Atitlan. He chose the image of the maize god in lieu of the image of Christ. Around it are the four evangelists of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. That's how they're represented in Revelation. The Maya natives were very pleased with the priest's decision. Both Jesus Christ and the Maya maize god are associated with fish, grain, and the resurrection. And by the way, I was at Santiago Atitlan in January with Kurt and with Neil. He's going to be talking this afternoon. And our guide told us that 50% of the people in that area are LDS. I was shocked. I wonder if that has something to do with Alan Christensen's work. It surely must. Then when we think of Christian symbolism, we visualize the sign of a fish, which has been used almost 2,000 years, starting with the catacombs under Rome, when the sign of the fish was a secret symbol for followers of Christ. The word for fish is ichthys and has become the acronym of Jesus Christ. Many scriptures refer to fish, the most notable Matthew 1:17, where Christ said that to the fishermen, Simon and Andrew, "Come ye after me, and I will make you become fishers of men." And then in the future, they would catch men. We see this comparable to the fish also in Jeremiah 16, 15, and 16 of the Old Testament, where we read the Lord saying that he would send fishers to bring the children of Israel from the north to the land of their fathers. Zeranza Friedman, in an article in Biblical Archaeology Review, writes, quote, "In early Christian art, the fish symbolizes the Christian soul, and the fisherman symbolizes Jesus or the apostles who are believers of salvation. It has already been established that fish are associated with grain, and didn't Christ pass fishes and loaves of bread to the multitude that miraculously filled all those who ate?" In the Bible, the word corn refers to various types of cereals used for food, such as wheat and barley, not the type of maize that was used in Mesoamerica, but nevertheless, it has the same purpose of making breadstuffs, and was also used in terminology in close association pertaining to men. For example, Christ taught, "I am the bread of life. He that cometh after me shall not hunger. He who that cometh to me shall not hunger." And at the Last Supper, Christ told his disciples to take the bread, break it, and eat, saying, "This is my body, which is given for you. This do in remembrance of me." He did the same when he visited the people in the Western Hemisphere, as recorded in the Book of Mormon. So here we too have the symbolic analogy between men and grain. The parables of the wheat and tares has a similar connotation. Doctrine and Covenants also brings up the subject of the wheat and tares in the world, that is, the people of the world which contain both good and evil dispositions, but are to remain in the world and grow together until the harvest is ripe. In Doctrine and Covenants 101:65, the Lord's revelation to Joseph Smith reads, "I must gather together my people according to the parable of the wheat and tares, that the wheat may be secured in the garner to possess eternal life and be crowned with celestial glory when I shall come to my king in my kingdom of my Father to reward every man according to his works." Unquote. This verse is referring to the resurrection of the righteous. The next verse gives the fate of the tares, the noxious weeds or evil individuals that will be burned. In other words, they will not have the same reward as the faithful to God. It may be plausible that the corresponding similarities between here have their roots in the Middle East, but these ideas may also be derived from the observance of natural phenomena on the earth that I would consider a type and a shadow of our Creator's plan. However, one has to wonder about the similarity between the different Mesoamerican and Middle Eastern traditions and mythologies that may indicate a shared ancestral iconography, custom, and usage of fish, grain, man, and resurrection. That's it.